Welcome back, folks. It's Roaring Dr. J. And I bet you can't guess why. Well, turns out Roaring Kitty held on to an awful lot of that stock and then drove it up as much as 75%. You want to know what Pete and I think? Stay tuned for The Rebel's Edge. Bang! Bang.
I got Roaring Johnny.
I think I like Roaring Johnny better than Roaring Doc.
Was it Roaring Doc for a while? I mean, geez.
Wow. For those of you who do not follow the Roaring Kitty saga or who somehow managed to miss Pete, who's a star in Dumb Money.
Star in a thing called Dumb Money. None of that sounds good.
Pete is actually featured in Dumb Money, folks. The story about Roaring Kitty and the meme stock frenzy that carried GameStop, GME, AMC, the theater chain, Koss headphones, a bunch of stocks that had no business running to the upside, but they had big short interests. And so Roaring Kitty and his crew came in and squeezed and drove those stocks to dizzying heights. So much so that even Chamath and a few of the other folks that are on the periphery jumped in there, Pete.
Yeah.
Well, they crashed and burned as predicted, but then they started coming back in the last 2 weeks because Roaring Kitty was back. And that's one of the stories that we'll talk about today. Again, folks, he is Pete Najarian. I'm John Najarian. We welcome you back to The Rebel's Edge. We're fast approaching 400 episodes, Pete, by the way, of The Rebel's Edge. Yeah. So we might have to have a cake or something. And by the way, we're going to be filming at Grant Cardone's headquarters again tomorrow because we'll be recording with Mr. Cardone, Grant Cardone and Cardone Capital in Aventura, Florida. So you'll still get The Rebel's Edge, but it'll be coming from Aventura. Anyway, Pete, should we dive into today's numbers?
Let's do it. We got some good ones in front of us, John.
We do. And in fact, folks, you know, the PMI, the ISM today, and then the JOLTS job opening tomorrow, Tuesday. Those reports, as well as the Friday jobs report, that's known as the non-farm payroll, those will be interesting. I don't think, Pete, that we're going to get something that's going to drive the Fed to make cuts, though. How about you?
No, I totally agree with you, John. I think one of the things that we've talked about for a long time, especially this year, 2024, has been all of the data collection that goes into what the Fed takes a look at. And obviously, last week we had PCE. That's their numero uno. They seem to think that is one of the best tells. But they don't just go off of that. They go off of all these other numbers too. And you just mentioned it, John. We still got JOLTS. We've got PMI. We got ISM today. And so it makes it pretty interesting. And we'll see how this whole thing plays out. I don't expect it to change a whole lot from where we were. We still have a lot of stickiness to this inflation. I know it's been a headache. I don't know that they feel comfortable enough at this point in time to actually make any cuts. And a lot of people were saying 6 or 7 for the year. They certainly were wrong. But, maybe September, John. And if not September, a lot of folks are even saying maybe December. It could happen. December's a long ways away, so I'm not going to dismiss it. But we might even see something a little earlier. We'll see. But with the election and everything else, that does change things a little bit this year.
Yeah, it does, folks. You have to pay attention to that. Of course, the trial that ended with multiple convictions of President Trump last week, in some people's opinions, almost eliminating him. In other people's opinions, driving him right back into the White House. So like Pete says, a lot of time between now and November 4th. And of course, December, like Pete's saying, as far as the last time this year that the Fed could possibly cut rates. But there's a lot of meetings between here and there.
Yep.
Pete, let's talk about fantastic futures. And one of these fantastic futures I'm going to steal from my brother, which is natural gas, because European natural gas prices spiked to a 6-month high due to sudden outages in Norway, one of the main places that they get natural gas, since somebody blew up the pipeline out of Russia. And that's why natural gas is spiking in Europe. And obviously it's going to drive up our prices as well, Pete.
Absolutely. Nat gas definitely on a move. Does it get back up and above 3? I think there's a good, strong possibility. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think that's a possibility for sure based on the backdrop. I'm going to look right now, John, at crude oil, and here's why. I go back to last Wednesday. So here we sit on a Monday, and you go back to last Wednesday, not all that long ago. You take a look at where oil was, John, and you're talking nat gas, and I'm talking oil here. It was above 80. And here we are today, we're somewhere in the 74s. So you want to talk about something that's taking a real hit to the mouth. I'll tell you what, crude oil right now is taking it. And it's been a brutal slide. And that's been one of the weaknesses when you look at sectors. We've seen the sector of the energy really taking it on the chin as well. So we'll see where things actually end up. You know what? We've had a lot of movement there, but 80 to 74, that's a very rapid move from just last Wednesday.
Sure is. And, I'm right there in the camp, Pete, that when we touched 85, I thought, okay, here comes 100 or at least 90. And we reversed pretty hard off of that. Diesel demand being way down. And that's obviously one of the distillates, as they say, in the oil trade. And if diesel's down, Pete, maybe people aren't buying as much stuff.
Yeah.
Because, of course, most of that stuff gets moved by trains, planes, and automobiles, and the last mile is usually those big trucks, almost exclusively running on diesel. So we're going to be talking about that for a while to come, folks. All right, now we're going to dive into the stocks, and we have to start with GameStop. At the top of the show, when Raging Johnny, as Pete says, was wearing that red headband like Roaring Kitty, GameStop, he basically said in not so many words, Pete, but more of his actions, that he still owns about 180 million worth of GameStop GME. And he's looking, Keith Gill is, to drive it higher. And that meme army lined right up and jumped in with him. What's your take on this, Pete?
Yeah, it sure is interesting, John. But you pointed out, and this just shows you how you've got to be very careful if you're going to be a part of any of these kinds of trades when it's these memes, because stock was up 75%, and it was up 70%, and it was up 60%. So this thing has it made a giant move to the upside. And oh, by the way, it's not just shares, John. He actually disclosed 120,000 options expiring June 21st. These are the 20 strike calls. So I'd say he's done pretty well on that as well. I mean, it's been interesting to watch how he's pivoted, this Roaring Kitty, and moved around a little bit. I just caution people to say, hey, look, understand the risks that you're facing here. And just like him, I think he figured out maybe the options might not be such a bad way to play this thing as well, because obviously we've got liquidity, but you've got liquidity in stock too. I mean, we're talking about in the first 90 minutes, they traded 93 million shares versus a daily average of 24 million, John. So they've been busy there too, but I think sometimes you've got a little bit better opportunity when you've got the options, if that's what you choose to do, only because from a dollar perspective, they're a heck of a lot less expensive than when you're looking at the stock itself. I think this is a wild, wild west kind of a trade, but Roaring Kitty is back, John.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, folks, just to give you some idea, the S&P 500, what is the VIX or the volatility of that? Probably around 11, Pete. And the volatility for this week expiring calls in GameStop, 411. 411%. I mean, it's through the roof, folks. So you want implied volatility up over 400? Yes, that does imply that this meme stock, GameStop, is making some wild moves. And indeed it is. All right, let's talk about ARM Holdings, Pete. This one came public again this year through a direct listing, I believe. And they say that they're going to have 100 billion of their devices AI ready. And no, I didn't stutter. 100 billion, not 100 million, 100 billion of their AI devices AI ready by the end of 2025. Also, NVIDIA has a corporate event on Wednesday. I'm not linking them and saying, oh, NVIDIA's buying ARM Holdings. I'm not doing that. But what I am doing is the CEO of ARM Holdings, Pete, was at Computex, which happens in Taipei right now. And he's the one saying 100 billion chips. Yeah, by the end of next year. What do you think?
It's absolutely amazing, isn't it? I mean, this is incredible. And I think you led into it the right way. You start off with ARM, but take a look over at NVIDIA as well, because they don't ever stop releasing something, John. And, you know, their AI factories and the data centers and all those things also take all kinds of different other elements of the marketplace as well. So I think that's something that people should definitely investigate a little bit more, because they sure do suck in a lot of power, which means how do you get more efficient? Well, there's other places to get that efficiency, and we'll talk about that another time. But when we're looking at ARM, John, 129, almost 130 today. It's not quite the 52-week highs or the highs that it's had since it's been a publicly traded company, but it's not that far off either. And this is a really, really interesting company, and 100 billion devices. I don't even know how to figure that all out, John, when you're talking about the AI and this and that. I mean, this is something special, and we are in the midst of it. And don't forget, don't sleep on AMD, because they're out there too, and they're basically putting their chest out saying, hey, look, it ain't just NVIDIA. It's not just ARM. We're here as well. So there's a lot that are vying for everybody right now in the AI world, no doubt about it.
No doubt, Pete. All right, well, let's take a look at one with not such good news as ARM or NVIDIA. Let's take a look at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, because significant decline in the shares of GlaxoSmithKline, because a Delaware state court ruled that Zantac could indeed be leading to cancer. And for that, they're saying, hey, jury trials, bring them. When they announced that, Pete, they started slapping this stock pretty hard. And this is one where it's histamines. So people that, for instance, suffer hay fever and things like that, they take Zantac. And, you know, it's an over-the-counter, Pete. So, I mean, you don't need a prescription to get this one, not the normal formation anyway. Maybe there's a stronger formation that I'm unaware of. But this has probably had billions of doses out there. So if indeed it is causing cancers in some people, I can smell $1 billion plus settlement coming through these trials that have now been allowed by Delaware, Pete.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, John. I mean, they do have a deep and a strong pipeline. They do have an incredible number of drugs that are out there. It is at, you know, the 2024 lows today, right around that $40 level. It's not down as much as maybe could have been down, quite frankly. I mean, this is a stock that doesn't really have a lot of volatility. It moves around a little bit, but when you look at the 52-week high and low, it's in a fairly tight range. So it's off of those highs, it's onto those lows, but not by a whole heck of a lot. So it's interesting. And to your point, John, I think this could be a multi-billion-dollar type issue if things get proven out. And certainly it looks like they're on their way to that next level. And that's something that's got to be concerning. If you're a holder, you might want to have some puts if you want to keep on holding that. I'm not trying to push everything options, but I just think for anybody who wants to be involved there, they better have some sort of protection in place, because you just never know. And obviously, if this thing's going to be in court and then you really don't know, things get a little bit dicey. So it's interesting to see that it's not hit as hard as I thought it would be, John. But this is sort of just the beginning. So we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, it's again, we're not trying to put any spin on things, folks. We've reported the news as it happened. And we're just giving you our read of what could happen if indeed this goes to those trials that the Delaware court said it could go to. And if that happens, I got to believe there'll be settlement talks, Pete, because you don't want to put this before a jury if they can bring evidence of a lot of harm done to people. Enough said. All right, let's hit one more stock, Pete. Autodesk. So it's a $45 billion stock. They had good news. Pre-market, an audit committee investigation determined that there will be zero restatement or adjustment of any audited or unaudited non-GAAP financial statements. You could put that in quotes. Well, so that's good news, because, a restatement would mean we made a mistake or our auditors made a mistake one way or the other. That's not good for the stock. So the stock popped on this news, and it opened at $2.19 or something. Well, sold off $7, $8 like that, and now it's $2.11, Pete. So despite the fact that this is good news, now it's only holding on to half of that gain, about 5%.
Yeah, anytime you've got something like this, though, out there, John, I think people start to get a little bit nervous and say, well, you know what? We like that they made a move, and they did make a move. They replaced the CFO with somebody who was on the board, and then the board had to go through this whole investigation and everything else. And it's going to be a little bit messy maybe for a while when you're talking about the accounting of what's going on. That's always a bit concerning. I think that at least they got out in front of it, John. So that's a positive, and I think it could be very positive going forward as well. So I'm not negative at all on this at this point in time. They addressed the issue. They did it in a very rapid fashion, and now they're moving on. And so my hat's off to them for doing that. Now it just comes down to, all right, now we get back to P&L. How's the free cash flow? How's this? How's that? All the things that the fundamental side of the business have. I think that's what we'll be starting to focus on. And the next quarter might be pretty interesting. We'll see how that goes, because obviously you're taking somebody off of a position and putting them into the spot of the new CFO. That makes it pretty interesting. And that same person that they're replacing is now going to be or that got replaced is the chief strategy officer. So it wasn't something so bad that she's gone. She's still there, and they put her into a new spot.
Well, folks, we usually drift into a realm that Pete is very, very expert in, other than options and investments, and that is sports. You know that you've heard me say before, he does a 2-hour sports show on WCCO with his buddy Schwartz.
Schwartz.
May the power of the Schwartz be with you.
Yes.
But Pete does that show on WCCO, folks, on Sundays, 10 to noon Central Time. But you were out in San Francisco, Pete, hanging around with your favorite players and coaches, the 49ers, of all places, the number 2 team in all of football last year. Maybe you want to say a little bit about that before we drop into all the rest of your sports observations.
Sure. The 49ers, it was the OTAs, John, and that basically, all that really means is they're all getting together. It is optional, but most everybody shows up. I did see Deebo Samuel there, talked to him for a little while. Let me tell you, what a great guy. Because when I saw him, John, I'm like, hey, Deebo, how you doing, man? And he's like, hey, Nigerian, and all that stuff. We're going back and forth. And I go, hey, I'm going to be at your old school later on this year. And I said, Clemson, right? He goes, South Carolina. So I kind of put my foot in my mouth on that one. But he was still laughing about it. A lot of the guys were there, John. Not everybody was there. Kittle was there, but he didn't participate. And that's fairly normal. So people sometimes like to make a big deal out of this guy being not there. Bosa was not there. I talked to a lot of the guys. I talked to the physical trainer and everything, and he goes, hey, Pete, the reality with Bosa is he is so committed and so disciplined that he gets worse if he comes here. He already knows the defense, so there's no reason for him to be here. So he's actually in Florida right now. That's where he trains. So he's doing his whole thing. But I did see some interesting things. One thing I will leave with you on this one, John. How about this? So I'm there, been there for a couple hours, walking around with various people, and a lot of great people. They have some wonderful people on their team. And some of the coaches are guys that I played against. Keena Turner, you probably remember that linebacker. He was one of the guys, and they really gave me the unbelievable tour of things and let me get a big feel for everything. And Brock Purdy was there, right? Mm-hmm. So who was the last guy on the field? First guy on the field, last guy off the field, and he was there at least an hour. And I say at least an hour after practice because I left. So what player would do something like that, do you think?
Yeah, well, a guy that was Mr. Irrelevant. a guy
Bingo.
that, yeah, a guy that had to fight his way on to make a roster and then made himself into one of the best players in the NFL. A
Yeah.
guy that's going to sign a record contract at the end of this season, Pete. That kind
Yeah.
of guy.
Well, and he's that kind of guy as far as he's a great guy. He's a team guy. He's committed. And John, at the very end of practice, he has guys out there that probably should have. If I were one of those players on the offensive side of the ball, I guarantee you one thing, I'd be out there with Brock until he's done. But guys were walking off, and everything like they can, and they, basically should. But I'll tell you what, he was throwing to the ball boys. He was throwing to the trainers. He was throwing all this stuff. And he was working on his craft and throwing a great ball, by the way. The guy looked really, really good. I thought he was amazing. By the way, on the same note, we might as well bring this one up too, John. Justin Jefferson, 4 years, $140 million, $110 million of it guaranteed. The highest paid player, not a quarterback ever.
Wow.
So take that in for a second. I mean, that is just absolutely extraordinary. And that just happened within the last couple of hours, and he's already put stuff up on Twitter and stuff, talking about thanking God and thanking everybody involved, and you should. It's great that he does. I appreciate the guy that much more. He's a great kid up front too, John. When you meet him, he talks. He's nice. He doesn't just stand there and pretend like he's talking to you and then walks away. He's not one of those guys. Good guy, looks you in the eye, and he'll talk to you as long as you want. So great person. All right, the next thing I just wanted to jump onto this, John. How about this? In the NFL, they're always getting these guys that are track athletes or some other sport. Maybe it's an amateur sport, whatever it might be. In this particular case, it's track and field. In this case, it's field. So we got a guy who's a gold medalist from right here, the University of Minnesota, Dan Gable Stevenson. By the way, Dan Gable's an interesting first name for a guy who didn't go to Iowa. But anyway, Dan Gable Stevenson. Now, he won the gold medal in 2021, and the reason it was 2021, COVID and all the rest of it, 6 foot, 270-pound kid, and he just signed with the Buffalo Bills. So here's the interesting thing, and I'll throw this one out for you, John. So Brock Lesnar did the same thing with the Minnesota Vikings, right? He was a pro wrestler and, a different type of sport altogether. He had played some high school football, but high school football, it's a little different than the NFL. It didn't go so well for Brock Lesnar. But there are guys out there who, Bob Hayes, Curly Culp, Willie Gault, Michael Carter, that shot putter who threw 82 feet in high school, John, was unbelievable. Texas guy, played for the 49ers. He's up on the wall there. There's another guy named Stephen Neal, an offensive guard for the 3-time Super Bowls, at least for him, with the New England Patriots. So he did pretty well. Here's the one thing. Every one of those guys, I looked it up, every one of the guys I mentioned all played at least high school football and in some cases college football. Now, Dan Gable Stevenson's never played football ever. He didn't play 5th grade football. He didn't play high school football. He didn't play college football. So the question for you is, can this guy play in the NFL? I think he's a D tackle.
Well, it'll be very instructional for other great athletes to see if he can turn these skills, because as you said, Olympic champion, Pete, named after the great Dan Gable, and he is not related. His mother was in love, apparently, with Dan Gable. I don't know what his dad thought of that.
Yeah,
Pete,
I was a little bit nervous.
I want to name my kid Pete Nigerian Macumber or whatever. It's like, what? But here he is, Dan Gable Stevenson, Olympic champion, fantastic wrestler. His older brother in the WWE, Pete. His older brother wrestles, I think, under the name Kemp or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, can he translate the great skills that he's got into like a nose guard or something like that? Maybe. I mean, he's definitely going to be one of the great athletes on the field, but it is a different sport completely than what he's used to. If he was to go into UFC, okay, still not the same sport as the one he's in, but there are a lot of really successful wrestlers, jiu-jitsu artists, taekwondo, karate, any of those things in the UFC, not so much in the NFL. So obviously the odds are stacked against him, despite a guy like Brock Lesnar, who, certainly at his size and weight looked like he could be a guy that might make the Vikings. And I know he tried out at least once, Pete, if not twice, for the Vikings, like you said. But hey, I'll be it'll be compelling to see if he can indeed compete with these guys. He's got the skills. He's going to be as strong as any person on that line, offense or defense, and he's going to be quick. So who knows? Alan Page, as you know, Pete, I played with Alan Page in the twilight of his career. When he came out of Notre Dame, he's 275 pounds, MVP of the league as a defensive player. But by the time I was playing with him, he was 225, but he was still cat quick, and he could get into the gap so quickly that he could disrupt plays. Maybe this guy is like that, as well as stronger, because he's 270 pounds. I'm anxious to see him, Pete. I wish the team, I wish the Buffalo Bills practices were on TV, because I'd be watching.
Well, I wish they had him Hard Knocks. Maybe they ought to last minute just thinking, hey, we're going to Buffalo. It could be pretty fun. It could be pretty interesting. But, boy, there's a lot of stuff going on in the markets, John. It's been a lot of fun. And, boy, there was a lot of sports to pick around this time. I mean, there's a lot going on, and it's still going on. It's unbelievable what's happening. Caitlin Clark and all that stuff. I mean, there's a million things going on. But we still got you covered the rest of the week.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about Caitlin Clark. And what's going on with the WNBA and so forth. And we welcome all of you to join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Pete and I will be working throughout the day today on unusual option activity like we had in GameStop, like we have every single day, multiple hits of unusual activity. You want to see where that is? Go to marketrebellion.com/get started. That's marketrebellion.com/get started, and you could start trading like us. All right. See you tomorrow at 1, everybody.